You know what has nothing to do with emotional balance? Checking if they've seen your message, rereading the same conversation for the 10th time, trying to figure out what you did wrong, watching someone's story who can't even be bothered to say good morning to you. Let's stop pretending that's a sign of love, because it isn't. The things I'm about to tell you in this video have already made completely different people start chasing me out of nowhere. People I genuinely thought had zero interest in me. And I'm not telling you this to promise you a specific outcome. I'm telling you because not reacting isn't a technique you pull out when you're desperate. It's a way of life. Instead of being the person waiting on a reply, you become the person who isn't even sure she wants to reply. This video is a direct, no-nonsense guide to what it actually means to stop reacting. And I'm not just going to hand you pretty theory. I'm going to tell you what I wish I had understood in the moments I felt most rejected, most ignored, most small. And don't think this is only about relationships. It's about the job you wanted and didn't get, the opportunity that looked perfect and slipped away, the recognition you expected that never came, the friend who pulled away without explanation. The mechanism is exactly the same. The more you need a specific outcome to feel okay, the less freedom you have inside that situation, and the more power you hand over to things you never actually controlled. Some people seem to be born not caring. You've probably seen someone like that, someone who clearly doesn't orbit other people's opinions, who doesn't lose sleep because a reply didn't come, who moves through life with a calm that almost feels inhuman. And the mistake most people make is assuming that kind of person was simply born that way, that it's a gift, luck, just their nature. It isn't. It's training. It's repetition. It's the ancient practice the Stoics described more than 2,000 years ago. The idea that nothing outside of you has power over your peace unless you hand that power over yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote this to himself every single day, not because he never felt anything, but precisely because he did feel things and needed the daily reminder of where to put his energy. Before anything else, I need you to understand something important. Not reacting does not mean stopping feeling. If you came to this video right now because you're hurting, because someone ignored you, because a person you cared about simply didn't care back the same way, I need you to pause for a second and ask yourself this. Do you want to learn how to stop reacting because it's going to make you stronger? Or do you just want this pain to stop right now? Because those are two different things. In the moments I felt most abandoned, when the person I wanted closest to me simply didn't give it back, I wish I had told myself, "You're going to be okay. You have value. You are enough." Recognizing that not reacting isn't about learning to stop caring, it's about learning where to direct that care. There's nothing wrong with being someone who feels deeply. The problem is when we shut our emotions down so completely that we become disconnected from ourselves and end up repeating the exact cycle that hurt us, just from the other side this time. I've lived that. I've been the one who pulled away too much after years of being the one who clung too hard. And that's not healing, that's just trading one wound for another. First thing you need to understand with complete clarity. Attachment is not the same thing as value. We grow up hearing a fantasy version of what devotion is supposed to look like, where the other person, the result, the job, the recognition, becomes the center of your universe. But that's not how it works. You are the center of your own life. And that's not selfish, that's simply a fact. It's your existence, your time, your freedom to choose. The simple fact that you exist is already on its own enough. You don't have to earn the right to be happy. Stoic philosophy calls this internal virtue, the idea that your worth doesn't depend on external circumstances because those you don't control. What you control is your judgment, your reaction, your discipline, and that right there is where all your freedom lives. Let me show you a picture that helped me understand this differently. Think of a magnetic field. Every charged particle has a kind of imbalance, an excess of charge pulling one way or the other, and it's exactly that imbalance that makes it get pulled towards something else that's charged. Now think of your emotional life as that field. When you become overly attached to a person, an outcome, a specific form of validation, it's because something inside you is already out of balance, and that imbalance goes looking for whatever might momentarily seem to stabilize it. The problem is two imbalanced charges never complete each other. They just create more instability. You're not drawn to the wrong person by accident. You're drawn to them because somehow they mirror an imbalance that already existed inside you before they ever showed up. Not reacting in that sense means neutralizing your own field. It doesn't mean stopping caring about someone. It means no longer needing it to feel whole. Because as long as you're charged, unbalanced, anxious for a specific response from the world, you'll never get to experience a relationship, an achievement, an opportunity in its fullest form. You'll always be filtering the experience through your own lack. Think of a very concrete situation. You know two people. One is stable, available, treats you well, but for some reason doesn't give you that stomach drop feeling. The other is inconsistent, texts when they feel like it, leaves you on red, and yet you can't stop thinking about them. That's not coincidence, and it's not because the chemistry with the second person is stronger. It's because the first person doesn't carry any imbalance to mirror back at you, so nothing gets activated. And this is exactly why I left the obsession method in the first pinned comment below this video. Because for many men, the problem is not that they are not attractive. The problem is that their need for approval starts speaking louder than their value. They text from pressure. They wait from anxiety. They try to read every signal, every pause, every change in tone, because deep down, they are trying to find proof that they are enough. The obsession method is for men who want to stop chasing approval, understand attraction with more clarity, and communicate from confidence instead of emotional pressure. So if you recognize yourself in this pattern, click the first pinned comment, check out the obsession method, and see if this is the next step for you. Because attraction starts to change when you stop begging to be chosen and start moving like a man who already knows his value. The second one, with all their inconsistency, hits exactly the unbalanced spot that already existed inside you long before they ever appeared. And that collision of imbalances is what feels intense, what feels like chemistry, what feels like fate. It isn't. It's repetition. And until you neutralize what's unbalanced inside you, you'll keep getting pulled toward the exact external version of that imbalance, whether it's a person, an unstable job, or a friendship that only shows up when it needs something. And this is exactly why real detachment means realizing you're already whole. The story that there's some person, some job, some specific kind of validation out there that's going to complete you is, at best, a comforting fantasy, and at worst, a prison. When someone shows disinterest and it hurts you in a way that feels disproportionate, it's worth asking why it's hitting this hard. The answer usually has nothing to do with the other person. It has to do with a part of you that already doubted its own value before that person ever showed up. Everything you experience, especially in your relationships, tends to be a mirror of how you see yourself. You wouldn't stay this stuck on someone inconsistent, unavailable, or who simply doesn't prioritize you if the steadiest part of you were the one in charge. The question is never, why doesn't this person want me? The right question is, why did I let that decide my worth? Back to it. Once you understand that attachment isn't value, the next step is practical, and it starts with centering yourself. And I mean that emotionally too. If you're in a place where you don't feel safe, the first move isn't distraction. It's making space to actually feel what needs to be felt. Go to your room, cry if you need to, take a longer shower, get your space organized, do something that isn't tied to that person or that situation. Sometimes the pain isn't even that big, just an expectation that wasn't met the way you wanted. Other times it's bigger, a breakup, a layoff, a deep disappointment. Either way, everyone tells you, just stay busy, distract yourself. And I do think that helps, but hyperproductivity doesn't fix the root issue, which is usually the feeling that you don't deserve to be treated well. So do things that make you feel worthy. If you wanted someone to surprise you with something thoughtful, surprise yourself. If you wanted to hear words of recognition, write them to yourself, honestly. If you wanted a hug, hug yourself. I know it sounds strange in theory, but it works, because the root of the problem was never the absence of the gesture itself. It was the belief that you only deserve that care if it comes from outside. I spent a long time trying to capture my own value through anything external, except through caring for myself, and that just trained me to treat my own worth like something disposable, easy to discount. You are not disposable. You are rare. Why would you be willing to sell yourself for less than your worth? A simple tool that helps a lot with this process of centering yourself is the nightly review. a practice Seneca recommended doing every single day before sleep. At the end of the day, you ask yourself 3 things. What imbalance got the better of me today? What did I still manage to do well despite that? And what can I adjust tomorrow? It's not self-criticism, it's an audit. You're not judging yourself. You're simply observing honestly where you spent energy on things that weren't under your control. I started doing this with just any notebook, 3 sentences a night, nothing elaborate. And what I noticed after a few weeks was that the same patterns kept repeating. I was spending most of my emotional energy thinking about things other people did or didn't do, and almost none thinking about what I was actually building. Just the act of writing it down every day starts reorganizing where your attention goes. After centering yourself, the second move is accepting people as they are, and from there, placing them where they actually belong in your life. And here comes a direct question you need to ask with honesty. Does this person actually reciprocate you? Because living a lie about that is, honestly, one of the cruelest things you can do to yourself. If you don't feel reciprocated, that doesn't necessarily mean you're unlovable. Sometimes it just means the other person doesn't have the capacity to give you what you give them. Picture something simple. You're a big glass, filled to the rim. The person you care about is a small teacup. When you pour everything you feel into that teacup, it overflows instantly, and sometimes that person will even tell you, directly or indirectly, that it's too much for them. And when they try to pour back what they have, it feels like not enough to you because you're the big glass. That doesn't necessarily mean they don't want to give you more. Sometimes it means they simply don't have the internal structure for it yet, or ever. And you can't demand to be treated the way you need by someone who never had that capacity in them. Understanding this, accepting people within their actual capacity, not the capacity you imagine or wish they had, is what gives you back your control. Because the deeper pain almost never comes from being left. It comes from continuing to wait for something that's never going to arrive. This leads directly into the discipline the Stoics placed at the center of everything, separating what's under your control from what isn't. Your effort, your honesty, the way you treat people, your reaction to what happens, that's yours. The other person's capacity to give you what you need, their decision to stay or leave, that was never yours and never will be. Most of the anguish we feel comes from exactly this miscalculation, trying to control and demand outcomes from something that was always outside our reach. When you hand back to the other person the responsibility for their own choices, and keep only the responsibility for yours, something shifts. You stop feeling abandoned and start feeling like you're finally choosing. And here comes maybe the most uncomfortable part, but also the most freeing part of this whole philosophy. Anyone, anything, can leave you at any moment. I know that's hard to hear, and I'm not going to soften it, because softening it doesn't actually help. The ancient Stoics practiced this on purpose, imagining the loss before it happened, not to live in fear, but for exactly the opposite reason, to stop depending on the permanence of something that was never guaranteed in the first place. Because think about it. If the only thing keeping you in a situation is the fear that if this person leaves, you'll find out you weren't enough, then you've already been accepting the bare minimum for a long time, just so you don't have to confirm that fear. And if that's your fear, I genuinely believe the opposite is true. It doesn't matter who stays or who goes. At the end of the day, you can always choose to walk out of the situation you're in right now. You have the power to stop replaying the same scene in your head right now. You don't have to stay sitting in the dark, waiting for a reply. You can free yourself from that. You don't need closure that depends on the other person in order to move forward. There's an exercise Marcus Aurelius described in his own private writings that helps enormously in this exact moment. He used to imagine his life from very far away, as if looking down from above, watching the cities, the roads, the people moving, everything reduced to a tiny scale. The point isn't to feel insignificant, it's the opposite. It's putting the problem back into its real size. That message that never came, that person who pulled away, that silence consuming you right now, all of it, seen from a distance, takes up a much smaller space than it feels like when you're trapped inside it. Try doing that right now, even quickly. Picture yourself 5 years from now looking back at this exact moment. Are you really going to remember it with this much intensity? Probably not. And if you already know this pain is going to fade with time, Why are you handing it your entire present right now? The last step is to stop affirming your need and start affirming your sufficiency. And this has nothing to do with magical thinking, with waiting for an answer to fall out of the sky. It has to do with the discipline of desire, one of the oldest pillars of this philosophy. The idea is simple. You train your mind to want what's actually good for you, and you give up wanting whatever just feeds your lack. When you swap, "I need this person, this validation, this outcome," for "I am enough regardless of that," you're not lying to yourself. You're realigning with what's actually under your control. And the side effect of that, which I've lived firsthand, is that the things you stopped desperately chasing start showing up more naturally, simply because you stopped filtering every interaction through neediness. That's not magic. It's simple emotional physics. Nobody wants to get close to someone who's openly begging to be validated. And everyone, without even realizing it, is drawn to whoever already seems whole. Think about a job interview. Whoever walks into the room desperate for that position, over-justifying, almost pleading, tends to give off exactly the insecurity that costs them the hire. Whoever walks in knowing their value exists independently of that one specific outcome. Knowing they'll be fine either way usually carries a confidence that completely changes how the room responds. It's not luck. Neediness has a scent, and people pick up on it even when they can't name what they're sensing. The same thing applies to every area of your life. This becomes even clearer when you look at your own phone. Every time you open social media, hoping to see if someone commented, liked, replied, you're essentially outsourcing your mood to a notification. And the problem isn't the notification itself, it's how much power you handed it before it even arrived. Here's a simple exercise. Next time you feel that almost physical urge to check your phone hoping for something specific, pause for 3 seconds and name what's happening. I'm about to hand my piece over to a response that isn't in my hands. Just naming it already breaks some of the autopilot. This isn't about deleting the app or pretending you don't care. It's about catching, in real time, the exact moment you're about to react, and consciously choosing whether handing that power away is actually worth it. That doesn't mean you sit still waiting for life to happen. The discipline of desire isn't passivity. If you want a specific opportunity, you need to put yourself in a position to receive it. You need to act. You need to prepare. But the question you have to ask yourself is, are you repeating the exact same pattern while expecting a different outcome? Because if you are, the result isn't going to change just because you want it more. You have to be willing to move differently in order to attract something different. And to move differently, you first have to stop anchoring yourself to whatever already hurt you. And if you actually want real recognition, real stability, anything real, you need to let go of attachment, because attachment was never the same thing as real value. The last thing I want to leave you with on this subject is that not reacting isn't coldness. It isn't pretending you don't care. It isn't playing some calculated game of indifference. It's being so secure in yourself, so aligned with your own judgment, that when something genuinely good arrives, you'll know exactly what to do with it instead of sabotaging it out of pure habit. Because if something good walked into your life right now, exactly the way you always said you wanted, and you still felt suspicion, discomfort, the urge to push it away, that would say a lot more about the imbalance still living inside you than about the situation itself. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind is a fortress, and that no outside force can break into that fortress without your permission. Not reacting is, at its core, strengthening that internal structure to the point where nothing outside of it can truly destabilize you. It isn't about stopping feeling, it's about feeling everything fully and still refusing to hand over the power to decide who you are. And maybe the hardest part of this entire philosophy to accept is this: nobody is coming to build that fortress for you. There's no person, no achievement, no follower count, no number in your bank account that's going to construct that internal structure on your behalf. That's work only you can do, alone, repeated, sometimes boring, sometimes lonely. But it's also the one thing nobody can ever take from you. You can lose a job, a relationship, a years-long friendship, an opportunity that felt certain. What you don't lose, if you've trained this enough, is your ability to judge clearly, to react with intention instead of impulse, to know exactly what's yours and what never was. That's the only possession that actually matters, because it's the only one that survives every external loss. As long as you're searching for security outside yourself, you'll always be at the mercy of something that can change its mind, its direction, its mood. When you build that security from the inside, you stop negotiating your worth with the world, and you simply start living inside it, without needing permission to exist exactly as you are. If anything in this video landed for you, hold on to this. You don't need to chase down anything that was already supposed to be yours. And if you want to take this lesson beyond this video, I left the obsession method in the first pinned comment below. It is for men who want to stop chasing approval, understand attraction with more clarity, communicate with more confidence, and become more intentional in the way they connect with others. Because the truth is simple. When you stop acting from neediness, your energy changes, your posture changes, your words carry more weight, and people begin to feel that difference before you even try to prove anything. So click the first pinned comment, check out the obsession method, and decide if this is the next step for you. Real attraction does not begin when you try to convince someone of your value. It begins when you finally start living from it. Thank you for being with me in this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.